Q-ism is a philosophy which argues that divinity takes on whatever form an individual either consciously or subconsciously projects, and that any focused, non-exploitative exercise can lead to spiritual progress. This includes engagement in science, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, history, art, literature, religion, music, dance, sports, even mundane everyday activities like cooking, cleaning, doing the dishes, or mowing the lawn. Rooted in a form of substance monism, it suggests the idea of a single reality or substance that pervades all existence. Let's call this substance Q. Q-ism argues that all existence, everything in this world, material and non-material, matter and mind, is a manifestation of Q. Not only that, but nothing is also a manifestation of Q. Now, of course, this seems confusing. How can everything and nothing both be derived from the same thing? How can they be derived from anything? To wrap our heads around it, let's go back to time t equals 0, the Big Bang. At time t equals 0, what was there? Absolutely nothing. No atoms, no subatomic particles, no space, no time, no gravity. Just pure nothing. Yet at the same time, everything that would ever be created in the history of the universe, all existence, all the energy, would arise from that nothing. At that point, everything and nothing are intertwined. This is Q. This is the divinity or quote-unquote God of Q-ism. But this isn't existence. We have this sort of nebulous state where everything and nothing are intertwined, but we don't have existence. To have existence, we need two things. We need a perturbation in Q, and we need consciousness. For there to be existence, there has to be a perturbation, creating an outlet or medium for Q to manifest itself. As an analogy, imagine standing on a frozen pond on a thin sheet of ice with water underneath. From our perspective, the water doesn't exist. But when the water's perturbed, either from someone splashing it or a wave coming in, then it becomes manifest. If we think of a perfect vacuum, the only way we can tell that space is a vacuum is by perturbing it, by measuring its pressure. So in the same way, Q also has to be perturbed to manifest itself. The perturbation here is the Big Bang, and the medium is existence itself, the universe. So the purpose and function of existence here is to serve as a medium for Q to manifest, to provide a canvas, if you will, for abstractions like gravity, space, time, energy, sound, heat, beauty, emotion, and life itself. Without the universe, none of these things would exist. Now, of course, someone has to be observing the perturbation, someone watching the water splash, someone measuring the pressure in the vacuum. Otherwise, it makes no sense to say there's existence. We need consciousness. Now, when we use the term consciousness, normally we think awareness. Something is conscious because it's aware of itself and its surroundings. But this is kind of an anthropomorphic use of the term. We can imagine a person being aware, or an animal, or even an insect. But what about an inanimate object like a rock or table? Are these objects aware of their existence? Consciousness arose with the Big Bang and exists everywhere Q manifests, in living and non-living things, including the rock, table, gravity, space, and time. Now, the consciousness in a rock or table isn't the same as what we'd expect in a living being. Consciousness in its most primitive form, proto-consciousness, can be thought of as nothing more than a distinction between the observer and the observed. The theory is that everything in this universe has the ability to experience, even if these experiences are much more primitive than our own. And what's the most primitive form of experience possible? Simple distinction between observer and observed, between quote-unquote yourself and your surroundings. This is what the Big Bang brought into the universe: immediate distinction, immediate proto-consciousness. Then with the evolution of matter in the form of hydrogen, you have for the first time the birth of a single discrete unit, a primitive sort of ego, proto-ego, if you will. The scope of experience evolves from mere distinction to individuation. Not only are you different from Q, but now you're the separate individual entity called the hydrogen atom. Eventually, simple atoms and elements combine to form the first known genetic codes, DNA and RNA. But the strands of DNA and RNA by themselves aren't alive. For there to be consciousness proper in the universe, not just proto-consciousness, there has to be life. So the question is, how do we define life? This is where free will comes in. The transition from proto-consciousness to consciousness in the universe coincides with the transition of events being purely stochastic or random in nature to those driven by choice or a free will. So once something has free will, it has life. Proto-consciousness becomes consciousness. Proto-ego becomes ego. When life ends, the reverse happens. Consciousness decays back into proto-consciousness of the physical body, space, and time. We can think of what we call the soul as nothing more than proto-consciousness of space and time. When life forms, proto-consciousness of space and time integrates with proto-consciousness of matter, forming a functioning living being. We could think of it like software and hardware in a computer. Now, the software isn't blank when it enters the hardware. This isn't Locke's tabula rasa. Just like software in a computer, the character in a living being can input and store information for use in any subsequent hardware it enters. Where does this information come from? From the individual's own thoughts and actions. Every thought and purposeful action a living being exercises leaves a permanent imprint on that being's character. This character transmits into each subsequent living being it enters through proto-consciousness of space and time. As character in a living being evolves and becomes more complex, it transmits into more complex hardware, and increasingly resembles its original unperturbed state Q. So we can think of the entirety of life itself here as a giant evolutionary journey that begins with the most primitive form of life up to insects, animals, humans, and ultimately Q itself. Hardware evolves through the process of natural selection, while character evolves through the process of thought and action. In this model, human beings are the closest manifestation of Q to its original state. Humans are the only form of life on this continuum that have the capability to live beyond the level of simple self-preservation and elevation. We're the only form of life able to think abstractly and ponder concepts beyond ourselves. Other forms of life can cooperate and work together in groups for a common purpose, but only out of compulsion to ensure individual survival and preservation. As humans, we're the only species who can do things that have no connection to self-interest. Acts like voluntarily relinquishing our resources to charity, donating our blood or organs without need for reimbursement, or devoting our time and energy to causes greater than ourselves. Non-exploitative action. This is what separates us from the rest of the living kingdom. But at the same time, what ties us to the living kingdom and what prevents us from reaching that highest level is the human ego. Thoughts or actions that are driven by or reinforce the ego confine us to the realm of consciousness. It's when we begin to shift our attention beyond ourselves and our own limited self-interest that we begin to understand the world itself. We see divinity manifest right in front of us in the physical and natural world, in nature, through the laws of science and mathematics, in religion, art, music, beauty, aesthetics, through the eyes of human beings and other forms of life, in the innocence of a child, love for strangers, Understanding Q in these various manifestations is the goal of life. Not to become the richest or smartest person in the world, to own the most territory or have the most power, the most fame or admiration. This is what's meant by spiritual progress, to know ourselves and to understand this divine element through the medium of the world. Once we've reached that highest state Q, the concept of I as individual is gone. There's no longer a distinction between us and our surroundings. Consciousness evolves to superconsciousness. We hope you've enjoyed this short introduction. Join us in our next video as we delve into other aspects of this model. In the meantime, feel free to leave a comment below or join in on the discussion.